When the HOA slapped me with a shocking fine for my kids' innocent chalk doodles, they never expected the entire neighborhood to erupt in a tidal wave of color-filled rebellion. Start from beginning, please. Subscribe. In the neighborhood of Willowgate Meadows, conflicts rarely grew beyond overwatered lawns or mysteriously relocated trash bins, but the day the violation notice arrived on my doorstep, something shifted in the very soil of the cul-de-sac. The paper was tucked neatly into a clear plastic sleeve, staked into my flower bed as though the board wanted to be certain every passerby could see my shame the moment they strolled down the sidewalk. It fluttered slightly in the early morning breeze, an accusatory white flag of war waved by someone too cowardly to confront me directly. The notice declared, in thick, bold letters, that the chalk drawings my children had created over the weekend violated community standards. Their pastel, suns, hopscotch grids, smiling clouds, and crooked rainbows were deemed graffiti. The word itself felt so severe, so dripping with criminal implication, that I read it twice just to confirm there wasn't some mistake. But there it was, a formal warning, paired with a $50 fine demanding immediate removal of the offending materials. The irony of calling chalk, washable, biodegradable, playful chalk, offending materials was not lost on me. The drawings had already faded to soft outlines thanks to last night's sprinkler cycle, but the board insisted neighbors had complained. Visual clutter, the notice read, aesthetic disruption, as though a child's whimsy could unravel the architectural balance of the entire neighborhood. Part of me wanted to laugh. Another part wanted to march down the street and demand to know which board member had taken issue with the rainbow beside their mailbox. But a greater part, the quiet but simmering one, felt something sour lodged beneath my ribs. It wasn't just the fine. It was the audacity, the implication that joy had rules, boundaries, and required prior approval. Throughout the day, neighbors emerged from their driveways like curious meerkats, each one noticing my posted violation. A few lingered a little too long, as though expecting something more dramatic to unfold. Others shook their heads sympathetically. By sunset, everyone seemed to know. Even before my kids asked why their artwork had earned us a punishment, the rumor had already taken root. Among the parents, outrage buzzed beneath casual conversation. Many whispered they had received similar warnings in the past, though not for chalk. Some had been fined for leaving a forgotten garden gnome by the porch, while others had been cited for bicycle tire marks on driveways. The HOA board, it seemed, enjoyed flexing its authority in elaborate but inconsistent ways, choosing new targets each season. But going after children's sidewalk chalk, that was a new low, a boundary crossed. Later that evening, after the sun sank behind the row of identical rooftops and the cicadas began humming their nightly chorus, I walked outside with a bucket of water, not to wash the chalk away, but to stare at the soft lines melting into the concrete, fading without my interference. The board had insisted I remove the art, but nature had already done the job for me. The absurdity of it all made my anger coiled tighter. My children had retreated inside after I explained the situation with as much gentleness as I could. Confusion clouded their faces. They couldn't understand why drawings meant to make neighbors smile had been labeled a problem. They had created their chalk village, tiny stick figures, crooked houses, winding roads, because they wanted to make the sidewalk more fun, not because they intended to upset some committee of adults meeting in a conference room decorated with live, laugh, love prints. As night deepened, porch lights flickered on across the neighborhood, one by one. I could feel eyes watching from windows, waiting to see whether I would comply with the notice, whether I would bow to the quiet tyranny of the HOA, whether I would let this slide like so many minor indignities homeowners endured. But I didn't wipe away the chalk. I didn't scrub. I didn't spray water across faded suns and smiling clouds. Instead, I stood in the quiet, looking at the canvas the sidewalk had once been, and something inside me hardened. If chalk was a problem, then chalk would become the solution, not just mine, everyone's. The fine wasn't the end. It was the ignition. Somewhere in the shadows of the street, beyond the identical fences and precise hedges, I sensed that others felt the same spark. The HOA board wanted a spotless, joyless, neutral neighborhood. They were about to get the opposite. And by the time the sun rose again on Willowgate Meadows, nothing would look the same. The neighborhood had no idea what was coming, and the next chapter of our suburban rebellion was already taking shape in whispers and text threads stretching into the night. The morning after the violation notice, the cul-de-sac woke to a mood that felt different. Charged, like the air before a storm. The sunlit sidewalks gleamed faintly from the sprinkler mist, leaving behind a glossy surface that would soon become a battleground of creativity. I sensed anticipation in the neighborhood before I even stepped outside. Something was brewing. Throughout the night, messages had trickled across group chats among parents, quiet coordination disguised as casual conversation. Word spread. If the board believed children's chalk was graffiti, then perhaps it was time to give them the biggest graffiti problem they ever witnessed. It began subtly. At first, only one neighbor emerged with a small tub of chalk. She pretended to check her mailbox, then bent down to sketch a daisy on the curb. Large, looping petals in soft peach and yellow. A few houses down, another neighbor crouched beside his driveway, pretending to inspect a crack in the pavement while shading in a swirling blue wave. Exchange by exchange, nod by nod, the movement grew. Before long, the entire street hummed with the quiet shuffle of chalk sticks against concrete. Bent backs, kneeling forms, and dragging colors transformed the once bland neighborhood into a living mural. Some families had planned for days without me even knowing, stockpiling chalk like it was contraband, filling storage bins with colors ranging from lemon yellow to neon magenta. Adults who hadn't touched chalk since childhood rediscovered the satisfying scrape of pigment against pavement. The HOA board preferred strict uniformity, neutral palettes, manicured lawns, identical mailboxes spaced at mathematically precise intervals. They wanted conformity. They wanted order. And Willowgate Meadows responded with chaos, but the playful, harmless kind. Sidewalks morphed into landscapes bursting with imaginative detail. One couple painted a sprawling galaxy, complete with twirling nebulae. A group of teenagers created a massive koi pond illusion across 3 driveways, each fish shimmering with overlapping strokes of orange and gold. Kids from every block joined forces to produce an enormous hopscotch path that snaked like a rainbow serpent through the cul-de-sac. The soft scrape of chalk beneath dozens of hands filled the air like a unified heartbeat. Parents smiled more that morning than they had in months. There was a sense of rebellion, yes, but also of camaraderie, an unspoken understanding that we were reclaiming something that had been chipped away by nitpicky rules and humorless regulations. Even the smallest children contributed, dragging chunky pavement chalk across the curb in wild, multicolored streaks that somehow fit into the larger tapestry. Their clothing quickly became smudged with pigment, but no parent stopped them. Instead, they encouraged wider strokes, bigger shapes, more color. Only one group did not participate: the HOA board. Their blinds twitched like frightened insects. A few board members stood on porches, arms crossed, watching the chaos unfold as though staring at an oncoming natural disaster. They clutched coffee mugs with trembling hands, glancing nervously at one another. no doubt imagining their next meeting filled with frantic references to community standards violations and urgent restoration costs. But for once, no one feared them. No resident paused their artwork when a board member emerged. No one rushed to blend in or pretend they weren't part of the movement. The HOA had exposed its own absurdity by calling children's chalk graffiti. And now the neighborhood was united in holding up a mirror. Hours passed. Color accumulated. The streets glowed with vibrancy, as though a festival had descended upon the suburb. The atmosphere felt almost celebratory, laughter floating through the air despite the absence of spoken words, replaced by the sound of chalk sticks breaking in half, hands brushing off dust, and sneakers scraping gently against concrete. At midday, the sun spotlighted our masterpiece. From above, if a drone had flown by, the cul-de-sac would have looked like a swirling kaleidoscope. Patterns overlapped, images intertwined, colors merged into a vivid collage. It wasn't neat, it wasn't uniform, it wasn't approved by any committee. And that was precisely the point. The HOA board finally made their move. A lone representative stepped out of his house, striding towards the center of the cul-de-sac like a general marching into battle. He carried a clipboard, a symbol of his authority, and a stiff posture that suggested he believed this spectacle would collapse the moment he opened his mouth. But no one acknowledged him. Chalk continued gliding along pavements. Colors continued stretching. Children continued laughing. The HOA board gestured frantically, waving arms, pacing back and forth. But he was powerless. Silenced not by confrontation, but by collective disregard. He eventually retreated indoors, leaving behind an expression of stunned disbelief. The rebellion had won the first battle. As the sun lowered, shadows stretched across the artwork, softening the edges and mingling the colors even more beautifully. Families stepped back to admire what they had created together. A normally silent, pristine cul-de-sac had transformed into a gallery, one crafted by dozens of hands, each stroke fueled by frustration, unity, and absolute determination. But deep down, we knew the board wouldn't let this go. Their pride had been bruised, their control challenged, their authority shaken. They would respond, likely with fines, letters, summonses, or threats of enforcement. Yet the neighborhood wasn't done. The chalk rebellion was still gaining momentum, and the board's next move would only make the finale more spectacular. And as night crept over the kaleidoscope streets, word spread. The HOA emergency meeting was scheduled for the following evening, and we were not stepping down.
By the time the HOA announced its emergency meeting, the neighborhood had already stepped into a new identity, one no longer bound by silent acceptance or rulebook obedience. The Chalk Rebellion had awakened a spirit that none of us realized had been buried under years of compliance. The board believed a stern lecture would scare residents back into submission. Instead, it only fueled what came next. The meeting took place in the community clubhouse, a squat beige building, chosen for its location at the center of Willowgate Meadows. Its windows were always spotless, its chairs arranged in perfect straight lines, its decor a study in lifeless neutrals. The board believed order began with appearance, and the clubhouse reflected that philosophy in every square inch. Residents arrived early, filling every seat. Parents with dust still lingering on their clothes from the chalk murals sat beside retirees who had added whimsical drawings to their driveways for the first time in decades. Teenagers lounged in the back row, still proud of the koi pond illusion they had created. The board members sat at the front, perched stiffly like judges awaiting a trial. The meeting commenced with the expected formality. The board president opened a binder thick with regulations, flipping through pages as though hunting for the exact clause that would justify the sweeping authority they intended to enforce. Though no dialogue was spoken aloud in this retelling, the mood made everything painfully clear. The board was furious, embarrassed, and ready to impose consequences. But the residents had come prepared, not for confrontation, but for something far more effective. The moment the meeting adjourned and board members attempted to assert themselves, the neighborhood quietly dispersed, not in retreat, but in coordination. Chalk bins reappeared. Buckets lined the sidewalks. Once again, families stepped outside into the cool night air. This time, it was bigger than art. It was a message. Under the glow of porch lights, neighbors sketched not only shapes and colors, but stories. The sidewalks filled with scenes of community cookouts, childhood games, and block parties long past. Someone illustrated the very moment the graffiti notice had been posted, a dramatic rendering of the violation signs sticking like a flag in a flower bed. People laughed silently as they worked, casting ironic glances at the identical beige houses lining the streets. The artwork spread like a slow-moving flood. Driveways, walkways, cul-de-sacs, even the clubhouse steps, no concrete surface remained untouched. With each stroke, the rebellion grew bolder, brighter, louder. The HOA board, cornered by a wave of harmless creativity, found itself powerless to squash it without inciting greater outrage. Then came the moment that changed everything. A summer storm rolled in. It arrived without warning, dark clouds sweeping over the neighborhood, thunder grumbling in the distance. The breeze picked up, tugging at loose clothing, swaying tree branches, creating ripples across freshly drawn designs. Residents paused their chalking as the first cool raindrops splattered the pavement. And then, in an instant, the sky opened. The downpour washed across the neighborhood, soaking every artwork. Colors bled into one another, transforming crisp lines into watercolor rivers. Murals dissolved into swirling clouds of pigment, creating unexpected patterns of movement and beauty. What had been a vibrant rebellion now blurred into one massive, shifting canvas. But no one panicked. No one rushed to shield their drawings. Instead, residents stepped into doorways or under umbrellas and watched as the storm completed the final act of their uprising. The chalk that the board had tried to ban washed away naturally, just as it always would have, proving the absurdity of the original fine. As rainwater carried color down the gutters, board members emerged from their homes, surveying the drenched neighborhood. The storm had stripped away their final argument. The chalk hadn't damaged property. It hadn't caused harm. It hadn't stained a single surface. It had simply existed for a brief moment, joyful, temporary, and communal, before nature swept it away. The next morning, the streets bore only faint pastel ghosts of the rebellion. Soft outlines lingered like memories, subtle and harmless. But the message had already taken root deeper than any chalk could have reached. When the board attempted to distribute new violation notices, something unexpected happened. No one accepted them. Homeowners refused, stacking the papers in a neat pile at the edge of the clubhouse lawn. The stack grew with each passing hour, a physical testament to unified rejection. The board, faced with a community no longer willing to bow to petty authority, held an emergency vote. 2 board members resigned. Regulations regarding children's play materials were rewritten, and the graffiti rule was struck entirely from the handbook. Willowgate Meadows changed that week, not because of chalk, but because the neighborhood realized it didn't need permission to enjoy itself. The rebellion, colorful and fleeting, had exposed how brittle the board's authority really was. By the following weekend, children returned to the sidewalks with renewed excitement. They drew rainbows, hopscotch paths, smiling suns, exactly as before. Parents watched with pride, knowing the board would never again dare interfere. The HOA wanted to control color. Instead, it drowned beneath it. And though the rain had washed away the murals, the memory of the rebellion remained permanent, proof that even the smallest, most temporary acts of defiance can leave the most lasting impact. The neighborhood had reclaimed its joy, one chalk stroke at a time.